Today in our People of God series, we are going to be looking at a man in Matthew 18, verses 1 through 4. A man that God used in the story of Jesus coming to earth and in his miraculous work. We get to see the way that he interacts with him and how when a man encounters Jesus, he's changed forever. But before we do, I want to remind you of something I'm sure that you have learned just living and growing up in school, but about the caste system in India. What that is it's been around for over 3,000 years. And what it is it's a breakdown of 4 different groups of people. Based on what family you're born in, you're put into a caste system. And this caste decides where you live, who you marry, what you do for a living, and ultimately what your value is. And if you're unfortunate and you end up being born in poverty, you're what is known as an untouchable. And the reason that this is unfortunate is because in Hindu culture, in the religion where they believe in reincarnation, if you are born in poverty, a lot of times they assume that you must have done something in your past life to deserve it. So these people are abused, they're neglected. There's headline after headline of people just being horribly treated and having a horrible situation happen to them because they're seen as sinners. And so today, you're probably confused why I'm bringing that up. But what I want us to see in the untouchables of India today is that in the time of Jesus, there were untouchables as well. But instead of being defined by the religious category or social hierarchy, it was defined by a disease that they had. So in Matthew 8, we see a man with leprosy. He is the definition of an untouchable in the time of Jesus. So this man in Matthew 18 truly was an untouchable in the time of Jesus. And what we see about this man in Scripture is we don't know much about him. All we know is that he is a leper. We don't know his family background. We have no idea what his hopes, his dreams are, what he's done in the past. All we know is that he is a man who has a need and comes running to Jesus. But we do know 3 things about him based on this passage and from knowing about leprosy in biblical times. And the first thing that we know about this man is that he's an outcast. In this time, leprosy was an infectious disease that couldn't be cured. It's not like today where you take antibiotics and it can be eliminated right away. It was something that was a lifelong sentence. People would have to be cast out of their villages and put in a community far away, often isolated and having to beg for food. The reason this was is because no one wanted to get this and be infected. It's even biblical. In Leviticus 13, God tells his people, if someone has leprosy, they are to be pushed out of the community, not out of hate, but so that this doesn't ravage the whole community. And when they approach someone else, they're supposed to say, I'm unclean, watch out for me, because I could get this sickness to you. And so we see that this man is not only an outcast because of this disease, but like the people today, the untouchables, where people assume that they must have done something to deserve this poverty, people in biblical times often assume that if you had a sickness or a disability, that maybe God gave you this as a punishment. And it's absolutely tragic because this man probably did nothing wrong, but just got this sickness. And so not only is he an outcast because of this sickness, but because people thought he was probably a sinner who deserved it. So all around, this man is struggling. He's an outcast in need. The second thing that we know about this man, based on his leprosy, just this disease, is that he was a man who had not been touched in years, had not had the power of human touch in a long time. And for a lot of us who hate physical touch, I know I'm not really like the biggest hug person, that doesn't sound like a horrible thing. But this is a huge deal. There's literally scientific studies that have gone into the power of human touch. There's studies that show that if a baby is not held in the first few months of life, if they're pretty neglected, then they will literally die for lack of human touch. So what we see is that this man is an outcast, and he also hasn't hugged family or friends in a long time because he is seen as someone who's unclean. And if someone were to reach out their hand to them, they might be made unclean too. And so we see that this man is completely outcast, untouchable. And there's this beautiful story in life of Mother Teresa. I'm sure you've heard of her. She goes to the untouchables of this day in India, and she made her whole ministry about being with those that no one else wanted to be around. And she says this quote that I think is so important for us to hear. She said, the biggest disease today is not leprosy or tuberculosis, but rather the feeling of being unwanted. And I'm sure that the man in this story, he hates this disease. It's a horrible one where you lose fingers and toes and it hurts. But what might even hurt worse is the feeling of complete isolation and being completely pushed away from community. The third thing that we see about this man is that he is a man of great faith. Even though he's an outcast and untouchable, these things don't prevent him from coming to Jesus in faith. Instead, they show his need for him, and he's aware that only God can heal him and help him be restored to community. And so we see that he comes running to Jesus in this chapter, that he runs up to Jesus and he says, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." And what I love about this response to Jesus is that he doesn't say, "Lord, I've kind of heard some things about you and I think maybe you can heal me, so could you please do that?" He says, "Lord, no, I know that you can heal. I have heard this and I believe it about you. It's just, are you willing to do it for me?" And so he asked Jesus, and then Jesus' response is one of the most beautiful passages in Scripture, in my opinion. In verse 3, it says, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. So Jesus sees this man in his faith, and he heals him. And what's amazing about it, and what I don't want us to miss, is that it says that he reaches out his hand and he touches the man. And if you haven't gotten everything else I've been saying, this man is literally an untouchable that Jesus touches. We see that Jesus takes on the risk of touching a man that no one else would reach out to. And what happens is it's not that this leprosy overcomes Jesus and gives it to him, but instead, even though Jesus was putting himself at risk, we see that Jesus instead overcomes this leprosy with his power and heals him. And what I love about this passage is that because we're in this series about the people of God and what we can learn from them, we have so much to learn from this man. This man who's an outcast and an untouchable, who comes to Jesus in faith. And when he does, Jesus reaches out his hand and touches him. The amazing thing about that is a lot of us here, we don't necessarily have an outward skin disease that shows how we're an outcast. Or luckily, we aren't born in a caste where we're outwardly abused and neglected and mistreated. But inwardly, we might have experienced what it feels like to be an outcast. Maybe we feel like we haven't been touched by anyone in years, like no one has reached out to us or cared for us. Or maybe our sin has made us feel unclean, like we don't belong or deserve to be in community with others. Or maybe even someone else's sin that they committed against you has made you feel the shame and made you feel like you're unclean. And today, what I want us to hear from this passage and from this man with leprosy is that a man who was defined by being a leper is now defined by the healing touch and power of Jesus Christ. And today, that can be the same truth for us. We don't have to be defined by these things that make us feel less than. Instead, in faith, calling out to Jesus like this man does, we can say to him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean," and that can be my identity today. And if you're wondering right now, "Lord, would you be willing to do that for me because I feel like I'm too far gone?" I want to remind you that the hand that reached out to him now has had hands. He stretched out his hands on the cross, and now when he reaches out his hands to us, his hands have the holes from the nails still in them. And so when Jesus died on the cross and took the sin of the world, that sin did not overcome him, but he overcame that sin and was risen again. And so yes, Jesus can handle it. And right now, he is reaching out his hand to us and saying that this can be our identity, being a cleansed, pure follower of him, that this can be who we're marked by, Jesus Christ.